My name is Roscoe Kasuja, and I'm going to be welcoming the first presenter, Mr. Patrick Monse, to talk about workplace violence in Uganda's public hospitals, hermeneutic focus on nurses' experience. Patrick will have 15 minutes. Patrick, if you're ready, please come.
Just a little. Okay, thank you. Good morning, members in the audience. Good morning, fellow presenters. I'm Patrick Monse from the School of Psychology. And I'm presenting on the topic, Sociocultural Psychologies, Communal Life and Selfhood in Mental Health and Community in relation to workplace violence against nurses in Uganda's public hospitals. And in terms of the sociocultural psychologies, I'm specifically looking at the hermeneutic strand or the hermeneutic sociocultural perspective and how it has been relevant in helping me to undertake my PhD work focusing on workplace violence against nurses. The hermeneutic approach specifically is rooted in the philosophical ideas of Heidegger and Gadamer, and as a sociocultural tradition, it embodies the qualitative requirements of interpreting texts based on individuals' sociocultural contexts. So the key argument here is that it focuses more on the specific social context of the participants. And within hermeneutics, it is an interpretive perspective that involves re-examination and reinterpretation of individuals' lived experiences. So the major focus in terms of interpretation within the specific social context is interpretation of the lived experiences. The sociocultural strand helps to understand the essence of lived experience that participants share within a common context. And in this case, we are looking at the context of public hospitals. The approach goes beyond description of the phenomenon of experience. So it is not merely descriptive, but it goes more into the area of interpretation, where the dimension of consciousness is expressed in language, historical, and sociocultural context. So largely, the hermeneutic approach facilitates the researcher to seek to hear and understand the voice and life world of the participant within their respective sociocultural context. It also provides researchers with an appropriate sociocultural frame of reference to deeply understand individuals' lived experience within their specific contexts. Essentially, it brings awareness to a researcher's positionality as a cultural insider or outsider, and creates opportunities for understanding human experiences from multiple perspectives. And it therefore provides the researcher with the ontological position from where they can see reality as individually constructed, but at the same time being shaped and modified by individuals' social and cultural worlds. So with an inclination to ontological alignment, the hermeneutic approach facilitates individuals to consciously express their subjective lived experience in the context of their political, social, and cultural realities from an ideographic position. And primarily, the framework acknowledges that people are embodied and embedded in particular historical, social, and cultural contexts. In essence, it puts emphasis on historicality of understanding one's background or situatedness in the world. In view of hermeneutics, all understanding is connected to individuals' sociocultural context, including one's historicality that cannot be eliminated. The fundamental premise which underlines hermeneutics is that meanings are socioculturally constructed depending on individuals' sociocultural context. So in my PhD work, which is in progress, the meanings of the participants are socioculturally derived from within their respective sociocultural context, which is the public hospitals. So arguably, the hermeneutic thought of understanding and engagement provides the agents, that is, participants and the researcher, an interpretive horizon that determines what is meaningful in a given sociocultural context. Essentially, it provides a more complete understanding and richer meaning to the questions that emerge from the lived experience based on the perspectives of the past and the present. And that is briefly in terms of that hermeneutic strand. And I have linked this strand to my study because it embraces a sociocultural tradition which acknowledges individuals' subjective lived experience. And in this case, the workplace violence against nurses in public hospitals. The goal of the hermeneutic framework within this study is to gain an in-depth understanding and meaning of workplace violence against nurses in public hospitals. Underpinned by Heidegger's interpretive lens, it facilitates exploration of nurse participants' views and workplace violence experiences from their emic perspective, or what we may call as the inside perspective, so that I'm able to understand how are those experiences from their own perspectives. The approach elucidates much of the social and cultural contexts that not only shape the routine nursing work, but also act as a frame of reference from where nurses make the sense of their workplace violence experiences. Largely, the hermeneutic focus situates nurses' workplace violence narratives in the larger sociocultural and historical contexts of the Ugandan society. Accordingly, the hermeneutic tradition is relevant in understanding important insights into the analysis of workplace violence experiences against nurses. And notably, it gives voice to the workplace violence experiences of nurses and to incorporate the experiences of the researcher throughout the interpretive process. And more importantly, it is linked to my study because it is congruent with the in-depth understanding of the lived workplace violence experiences of nurses within Uganda's public hospitals. The interpretive nature of hermeneutics is ideal to entirely understand workplace violence experiences against nurses, especially females, because it is holistic, contextualized, iterative, and essentially based on multiple interpretations. So basing on the participants' narratives, it can help me to generate multiple interpretations depending on what the participants share. More importantly, this lens is suitable to understand the constructivist ontology and interpretivist epistemology situated within the voices of the participants, who are the nurses, and the researcher. The hermeneutic circling enables the researcher to engage with the depth and breadth of the participants' voices within workplace violence data. The hermeneutic approach in this regard helps to understand the selfhood of workplace violence against nurses in public hospitals as a context. Therefore, within the field of psychology, it provides a sociocultural frame of reference to understand workplace violence as a lived experience from participants' narratives, embracing an ideographic focus in relation to individual nurses' specific hospital contexts. And how does it give me insights into understanding workplace violence against nurses? Workplace violence is embedded within the sociocultural fabric of the wider Ugandan society. And therefore, it is a product of the historical and sociocultural facets upheld in public hospitals. The occurrence of workplace violence is largely attributed to the sociocultural influences existing in hospital settings, and researchers have deliberated, for example, that workplace violence is a reflection of the level and wave of violence experienced in the whole society. And I quote, "We live in a violent society with violence in our streets, in our schools, in our homes, and in our hospitals. Therefore, workplace violence against nurses, and especially females, is instigated in the social-cultural constructions of gender and power operationalized in different forms within different work contexts, including public hospitals. Hence, it is argued that workplace violence against nurses is entrenched in the sociocultural orbit that exists in the larger Ugandan society. Historically, cultures and societal norms have socialized individuals into dominancy over women, whereas women are socialized to be passive and submissive members in the society. The patriarchal perceptions of male dominancy in society have been extended to organizations where the phenomenon is thriving, and therefore public hospitals have not been spared of this vice. Socioculturally, workplace violence against nurses is related to the histories and cultures that frame power and relegation operated in hospitals. The thriving and vibrant power-oriented disparities in hospitals are often associated with the patriarchal construction of the Ugandan society, characterized by unequal power which fuels workplace violence. Specifically, from the interrogation of my participants, it has been exhibited that nurses are subordinated in what has been termed as public patriarchy, which is primarily based in public spaces, such as public hospitals. This form of public patriarchy puts nurses at a disadvantaged position that makes them vulnerable to workplace violence. Generally, from participants' narratives, it is observed that violence against nurses in hospitals is patriarchal in nature and is commonly framed within the context of unequal power relations that emphasize men's and women's roles and assert dominancy over women. In conclusion, patriarchalism exhibited in the larger Ugandan society, devaluation and subordinate position of nursing attributed to the hierarchical medical model demonstrate the utility of adopting the hermeneutic sociocultural perspective to explain workplace violence against nurses in Uganda's public hospitals. It is important to note that workplace violence against nurses aligns well to the hermeneutic sociocultural perspective that captures the perception of devaluation and lack of power. Overall, workplace violence is rooted in the sociocultural milieu of the Ugandan society that is upheld and executed in public hospitals. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Another round of applause, please. I now would like to invite Ms. Namugeni Mastura, who's also a doctoral candidate, to come and talk about enhancing psychological well-being of adolescents in Kampala slums using positive psychological interventions based on a social cultural approach. Please let's welcome Ms. Namugeni Mastura. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Namugeni Mastura. I am a counseling psychologist, and I also happen to be a PhD student. I am a PhD student. I am under the Department of Mental Health and Community Psychology, Makerere University. The chair happens to be our head of department. The discussant is the former dean of psychology and the former deputy principal. I am also following the same cultural lens, socioculture. How can we use sociocultural perspective to enhance the psychological well-being of adolescents in Kampala slums? I went to Kampala because slums are not everywhere. Slums are in Kampala, or they are in towns. So I decided to go to Kampala. I've moved slums to ensure that I collect data from my participants to prepare for this conference, and also to write my PhD thesis. This is part of my PhD work. I am going to follow a new Vygotskian sociocultural approach, and I am borrowing a leaf from Cole, and is it Gaj Macha? I have a problem pronouncing that name. Gaj Macha Dasko, you know, I'm following how they really try to reappraise Levi Vygotsky's work. Let me wait for him to finish flashing my slides, and I start, yes. Thank you so much. Now, my study is looking at things positively. I am not looking at what is wrong. I am looking at what is right. You know, psychology has been looking at dysfunctional behavior. People have been looking at what is wrong with human beings, what is wrong with maybe animals or anything else. But as far as this study is concerned, I am taking a positive approach. So I am going to look at life in slums socioculturally, okay? Life in a slum, a sociocultural approach towards psychological well-being of adolescents in Kampala slums. So I'm going to look at what makes adolescents in slums psychologically well, but I'm taking a neo-Vygotskian approach. One might wonder, what is the meaning of the word neo? Or what is the meaning of the word Vygotskian? Neo, I tried to research the origin of this word. It originates from Greek. It means the age. So we are going to look at what happened after Neo-Vygotsky. People tried to improve on his work. After reading his publications and after looking at his writings, they tried not to develop new policies, but they came up with better ways of understanding his ideology of explaining human mental functioning. So that's why we have a neo-Vygotskian approach. This is someone, Vygotsky died a very young man, so he left most of his works uncompleted. So Russian psychologists thought it necessary to go on and improve on what he had already done. They tried to look at how he tried to use the concept, context, with similar words like situation and environment to explain human mental functioning. I'll start by defining some terms. I'll be using terms like psychological well-being, adolescence, slum, and a sociocultural approach, basically neo-Vygotskian. And I'm basing on the reappraisals made by Ko and Gaj Damascio, 2007. Psychological well-being, if I can explain what adolescence is, this is a period of rapid changes and challenges which exposes adolescents to a wide variety of psychosocial demands, desire to become independent from parents, developing skills in interacting well with peers, devising a workable set of ethical principles, becoming intellectually competent, and acquiring a sense of social, emotional, cognitive, physical, and spiritual responsibility. That is HAL 1927-24. And I am going to look at adolescents from the age of 13 up to 18. Yes. Psychological well-being. Psychological well-being has been defined in various terms. While the World Health Organization 2007 defines it as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, how they can cope and be resilient with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community or herself. So that is how I am going to explain psychological well-being as far as my presentation is concerned. Like I told you, this is just part of my PhD work, okay? I've been to the field, I've collected, how many? Like 4 sets of data. I'm sorry, Dr. Kasuja happens to be one of my supervisors, so I was asking him about how many sets of data we have collected as far as my PhD thesis is concerned, but he just laughed at me. I have collected 4 sets of data. And I am also going to define a slum as a household or a group of individuals living under the same roof in an urban area who lack durable housing, sufficient living space, and easy access to safe water, access to adequate sanitation, or security of tenure highlights. That is UN 2005. So those are the keywords that I'm going to be using in my presentation. I start my presentation with a quotation. It is trendy and modern, according to us, to learn and use words or terms, style of life, culture, and complying with everything done in a slum. At least every evening, it is mandatory upon us to go to some meeting place, and we start rehearsing and singing as a way of enjoying and identifying with the Jamaican life. We have our own business, we are resilient, we are focused and cultured. These were extracted from one of the stories I collected from adolescents. Remember, we are looking at sociocultural turn in psychology. I am trying to see what is it that make adolescents happy in a setting like a slum. That is why I am using the Vygotskian approach to guide my study. Whereas Vygotsky greatly emphasized the use of context to explain people's psychological well-being, scholars like Cole, Lulia tried to expound on what he did. They added there two more new terms, situation and environment. They were trying to show that if someone is in a certain situation, that situation can dictate your psychological well-being. Like, for example, when I came in the morning, I looked at the ambience of the place. Absolutely, my levels of psychological well-being went up because of the environment and the situation I'm in. Everyone was telling me, oh, you're smart. Oh, you're ready for the presentation. Whereas Vygotsky only emphasized context to be like the major determinant of people's well-being. Adolescents are social beings. Context, environment, and the situation, they happen to be key determinants of their behavior and psychological well-being. That is according to the Neo-Vygotskians. In a bid to understand what makes adolescents in slums psychologically well, we need to explore their environment, situation, and contexts. That is Gage, Damasco, 2007. Sociocultural concepts like context, environment, and situation influence the psychological well-being of adolescents. Why critics like Lulia, Cole came up to elaborate on what Levi Vygotsky had really developed, because they looked at the variations in the explanation of the word context. You know, Americans explained context in a totally different manner. The Russians explain context in a socially different manner. But if you add there the situation and the environment, you can easily attach meaning to what makes adolescents psychologically well. However, the orthodox explanations of psychological well-being underscore the social and cultural role in determining psychological well-being. That is why we really came up with this panel to come and explain what is socioculture. Our discussant will do the nitty-gritties of what it is all about, because he's like, you people, let us make a U-turn in psychology. Instead of looking at things cognitively, let us start looking at things socioculturally. Comparison of mainstream theories of social psychology, of what psychological well-being to a sociocultural viewpoint of psychological well-being. Individual well-being theories like happiness theory emphasize one's genetic factors to influence psychological well-being. That is Fredrickson, 2009, Limbomirsky, 2005, Silman, 2007. Socioculture theorists like Cole critique them by bringing to our attention that psychological well-being theories neglect sociocultural context. They do not consider culture, historical, and institutional context in helping us to understand psychological well-being. Community building theory stresses social capital, the relationship that arises in community to value members, and the value members place on those relationships. Much of this theory recognizes every individual in the society, whether disabled, old, young. It outlooks the internal and external factors in determining psychological well-being. Convincingly, from the above analysis, it is clear that mainstream theories of psychological well-being outlook the sociocultural predictors of psychological well-being, like context, situation, and environment, as echoed by the Neo-Vygotskians. Due to this need, a sociocultural approach, in this case Neo-Vygotskian approach, is applied to explain psychological well-being of adolescents in slums. The Neo-Vygotskian lens of psychological well-being of adolescents emphasizes the role of culture and context in the development of human mental functioning. Vygotsky's use of the concept context, along with similar terms like situation and environment, that is where these scholars like McDermott, 1983, really came in to explain what psychological well-being can really mean depending on someone's situation. Let's take an example of a pregnant woman. Most pregnant ladies tend to lose appetite. They become moody, but that can be explained because of the situation that they are in, okay? So this really justifies the explanation given by the Neo-Vygotskian that it's not only context, but also your situation can greatly influence your psychological well-being. What suggests that linkages between the levels of context, thus interpreted, can best be understood in terms of the culture tools like language, the counting system, writing, the maps, the idioms, the songs that are provided within the sociocultural context and used by individuals in the interpersonal context. Perceptions of psychological well-being, socioculturally, examples are drawn from story quotations obtained using a narrative inquiry approach. Participant 1, remember I've told you I'm from the field. I've collected data, different sets. Participant 1 socioculturally explains psychological well-being as mother's joy and peace. This is contrary to what scholars like Raff, Olaith, or Sylvan refer to as psychological well-being, because for them they look at psychological interventions to really make someone psychologically well. Participant 2 explains psychological well-being as acceptance, praise, love, and hard work, and company. If someone is praised for what they have done, if they're really appreciated, if they work extra harder, if they are given company wherever they are. To these adolescents in slums, that is psychological well-being. And this really brings out the need for a sociocultural turn in psychology, because this is how they're understanding their own psychological well-being when we look at the slum context and the situation they are in. The third participant says our language, for example, the statements we use, the words, the idioms, the proverbs, and the slogans. I'm still trying to interpret some of the words because culturally, in my situation, I looked at some words as obscene, but to them, that is what makes them psychologically fine. Implications of the theory, the significance of context, situation, and environment than the mainstream theories which outlook the sociocultural perspectives of psychological well-being can greatly help us to understand what makes adolescents in slums psychologically well. Their context, the situation, and their environment can be used to understand their psychological well-being. In conclusion, we can now understand that adolescent psychological well-being can best be explained very well socioculturally, depending on the context and their cultural manifestations. Thank you very much. Blessings.
Thank you, Mastula. Another round of applause for Mastula. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Ms. Linda Nakalawa to talk about the Ugandan youth mindsets and this is going to be a dialogical perspective. Thank you.
Mwasuze mutya bannyabo ne bassebo, erinnya lyange nze Nakalawa, ndi muzzukulu w'Abateesaaki, muzzukulu wa Muteegana, muzzukulu w'Abayita n'Omugumu, era muzzukulu wa Kannyana e Bwende, n'eddira Ngabi Ennyunga. Ssaabasajja Kabaka wa Buganda awangaale. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Linda Nakalawa. I started with a salutation to my ancestors and the Kabaka of Buganda. I'm talking to you this morning from a topic that I've focused on for a little over 3 years, and that is youth mindsets. Part of it is from my PhD work that focused on youth mindsets in the context of empowerment. And because Uganda has one of the youngest populations in the world, so the government of Uganda and development partners grapple with the idea of empowering them. And in the empowerment world, youth are always told, change your mindset. But I ask, change the mindset from what to what? So I set out to understand this issue of mindset better, specifically from a sociocultural perspective. And I did my data collection among youth in Buganda Kingdom. My PhD journey has opened up a whole new world to me, where I started to search for meaning in things that I used to take for granted. I'll give you an example. This is a WhatsApp post that I was talking about with some old girls, former schoolmates from Gayaza High School, just about a week ago. And it says, this lady is asking for advice. So I dated this guy last year, but he was always broke. He was loving and had a good heart, but the pockets were leaking. I didn't know how to dump him, so I faked my own death. I WhatsApped him pretending to be my cousin, using my phone, and told him I was dead. I told him only 50 people would be allowed to come to my funeral because of government regulations. After that, I blocked him everywhere. I have a fake account that I used to stalk people, so I've been monitoring his posts. He was hurt after my death. Shame. He posted about me for months after my death. Luckily, we never had any mutual friends. Lately, I noticed that things are going well for him. He got a job and seems like he is earning well. I want to go back to him, but I don't know how because he thinks I'm dead. Please give me some ideas. I love my man. So before you crucify the young lady, consider the young men. There is a program in Ugandan media called Abanonya. It's about people that are looking for spouses or partners. And sometimes we will find statements like, "Noonya omukazi omukulu nga yakolamu." I am looking for an older lady with money. And this is coming from a 21-year-old young man. And before we go ahead to judge these young people, let us consider the society within which we are growing. And we can learn a lot about this society from media, social media, and the language that is in this media. The advice that we are being given, gwe weetege osirike. This means set the trap, in which case you are the trap, and just watch the space. Sinze yaleeta ennaku. This means I am not the originator of poverty. So I see no reason why I should accept to suffer. Then some ladies will ask, tulyaza abalalu ng'oleeta mulema? It means if we can steal money from a madman, the lame man is no big deal. I'll give you one more. Capital ntambula naye. I usually hear this from young ladies. And it means I use what I want, what I have, to get what I want. I will say it like that because in Buganda we are known for being very polite. So what I'm talking to you about this morning is mindset. And I want to talk to you about the mainstream psychological theories of mindset, and also a critique of these theories of mindset and how they differ from the African view of the self or the mind. And I will offer you an alternative sociocultural view of mind based on the dialogical view of mind, and how this view can help us to understand youth mindsets. So the contemporary theories of mindsets, actually the concept of mindset can be traced back to the 20th century in the Wurzburg School of Cognitive Psychology. And here we have Gollwitzer and company. We've also heard about the positive psychology stream of mindset research. The best example we can give here is the growth and fixed mindset by Caroline Dweck. There have been other theories of mindset that have been applied to organizational psychology. And some of us in Makerere and Uganda might have heard about the Mind Education Program brought to us from South Korea, which focuses on the world of the heart. The literature that I have found on it, and I am still studying this view, does not yet show the theoretical basis of this approach, and so I am not adding it in my critique this morning. So when we look at the mainstream cognitive psychology views of mind, one of the best ways to understand something is to look at its history. These views of the cognitive psychological view of mind is based on traditional Western views of the self, and these assume that there is only one centralized thinker, one individual that is responsible for the thinking process. The psychology discipline, as many of us know it today, it evolved from the founding of experimental psychology back in the 19th century by Wundt in Germany. And it proposes the human mind could be measured and explained through experimental psychology. And experimental psychology emphasizes the use of natural science principles to explain human psychology. And this is complete with standardized tests and questionnaires and psychometric tests. The cognitive psychology view looks at the mind as, looks at the modern computer as a metaphor for the human mind, in the sense that it is an information processing system. By doing this, we tend to freeze the context or ignore it altogether, the context within which this individual is operating, and therefore we undermine the role of the social, cultural, and historical factors in their individual choices, their attitudes, and their actions. I am saying we because for 15 years, until 3 years ago, I was, one of the foot soldiers of that other view. Western psychology also draws a distinction between the self, which is inside, and the non-self, which is outside. This Cartesian view of the self defines the individual in terms of his own personal thoughts and individual attributes. But let us look at the African conception of self, or the African conception of mind. In my work, I've been inspired by the works of people that my ancestors would recognize. People like Mokize from South Africa, Nsamenang from Cameroon, and Scakoma from Uganda. There have been others, like Suzanne Kashner, who edited a book on the sociocultural turn in psychology, and that is American. From an African perspective, the individual exists in community. Most of us are familiar with the concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. In Luganda, we talk about Ubuntu Bulamu, and very many programs have started to be created based on the concept of Ubuntu Bulamu. In the African view, the individual is always in discourse with his or her environment. I have also borrowed from another discipline, from the work of Mikhail Bakhtin, and this is a Russian literary analyst who advances the dialogical theory of mind. At this point, I would really like to thank the College of Humanities, and my principal is in the audience. I am honored, because they advanced the idea of a multidisciplinary PhD, and my work blends psychology and literature. And because we cannot hope to advance if we remain as disciplinary silos. So I've had a lot of conversations from professors like DPO, Professor Chirimba, and Professor Susan Chiguli. And these have been really helpful for me. So going back to the Bakhtinian view of mind, the words we say, and this is a classic understanding of dialogism, the words we say, they do not originate from our own minds, but they are informed by the others around us in time and in space. These others may be present or absent, living or dead. When we make decisions, even when we are alone, we hold conversations with various voices in our heads whose guidance we seek, or at least their understanding. When we talk about the dialogical theory and its relevance to mindset, we need to understand the concept of voice or collective voices that we draw from, the idea of relationships, and the sociocultural and historical context. What other lessons for practitioners that we can pick from this dialogical view of mindset? To begin with, to get an idea about the mindsets of youth, look to the narratives and the voices on that issue in their society. It may not be that straightforward, but it can give us a starting point. We need to help people realize the kind of mindsets that they may hold by thinking deeper about the things we say in society and not taking them at face value. And we can do this for a lot of topics. For example, in the HIV world, we used our talking compounds when I was in school, and we would have signs like AIDS kills, abstinence is the best choice. But society would also say, omushaija tayangwa. You cannot say no to a man. And this complicates safe-sex negotiations. And then youth would ask, balimbajjamu mbaawo? Will they make wood out of me? Meaning, it is not so important for me to live that long. In Uganda, sciences and scientists are being promoted by the government as a vehicle for development. But when I did my data collection, a number of youth were telling me that their teachers would constantly tell them, sciences are not for everyone. In fact, one student was told when he did his first math test in S5, leave math now. So an individual is very capable of expressing different views on one topic, and sometimes these views can even be contradictory. And sometimes they may not be aware that they hold these views. But when we speak of mindset, we need to understand that this is not a mindset, as in set in stone, but it is a mindset, a set of ideas. What is the lesson that I would like to leave for fellow psychologists and scholars? Put down the questionnaire for a moment and listen to the people before you try to measure them. We may argue that we don't want to reinvent the wheel and these questionnaires have been standardized, validated, or adapted. But let me ask you this. Is it ethical to use a questionnaire that was originally designed to assess a fish on its ability to climb a tree? When I first did an intelligence test as a master's student, the results told me I had the basic intelligence of an 8-year-old American child. Listen to your people in context. Be willing to use qualitative methods, for example, narrative analysis, which I used for my research. There's also other examples, voice-centered relational analysis. This allows you to listen to what is said, what is not said, and sometimes you may realize that the person speaking to you is only talking about the views of the people around them. It also allows you to reflect on the economic, social, and structural context within which this person is speaking. My last point, we need to be willing to theorize rather than adapting and using foreign theories, which leaves us only the option of comparing and finding significant relationships between variables. Use research approaches that can capture and resonate with the African experience. That is why we speak of decolonizing methodology in psychology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Another round of applause to all our presenters. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into the most interesting part. I would like to invite the discussant. We've heard a lot about sociocultural approach, workplace violence. Masuda talked about the well-being of adolescents in slums, and Linda has just opened it up for Ugandan youth mindsets, and she offered us a dialogical perspective. Allow me to introduce Professor Julius Scakoma, who's going to lead the discussion. And please, if you have any questions, if something has been going on in your mind, this is going to be the session for you to express yourself and ask your question. May I, in this moment, as the discussant approaches the podium, shout out to the Principal Chus and the Dean School of Psychology. Greetings to you both. And everyone else, you're very welcome. Julius, please.
Roscoe, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I was just teasing him about his comment, saying that now the most interesting part is going to begin, and I was curious. I think that the most important part, we have already had it. Honestly speaking, these presenters have done us proud. They are all from the fraternity of psychology. And as one of their mentors, I'm very proud of what they are doing, what they continue to do. We thank you very much. Now, those who were here 2 days ago, there was another panel, again, made up of participants and presenters from the School of Psychology. And again, I was invited to make some few comments over what they had presented. And at that time, I actually gave a bit of the context that gave rise to these two panel discussions. And I will not go over what I said there, but only to say that what we've had today is a continuation of what we had with the first panel. The members of the two panels are all, first panel mostly was composed of former PhD students. They were on the PhD program in the School of Psychology and have now completed. Now the difference in this morning is that the panelists we have this morning are still on the PhD journey. And looking at how they have presented, I'm a supervisor of two of them, but also a mentor of one of them. And I know that one of them has already been cleared by the examiners. So very soon we're actually going to listen to their defense. So that's wonderful. And I think that in the presentation, she was building us up to that defense. So Linda, thank you for the performance. The other also coming up soon, and I think they are going to do a wonderful job. Now, to the topic of discussion. Collectively, these papers are actually under, the umbrella that we have termed socio-cultural perspectives in psychology. And we have been deliberate in choosing that topic. Deliberate in the sense that we wanted to share with the audience here our form of resistance to mainstream narratives that represent knowledge in psychology that has dominated how we do psychology, how we practice psychology, and how that is very limiting. So we decided that we should go beyond a narrative, a discourse that limits the possibilities of understanding the individual, understanding the core subject of psychology, which is the individual. Psychology is about nothing but understanding the individual in totality. However, what we have discovered, and some of what the panelists here have mentioned, is that if we go by the mainstream understanding of this individual, there has been limitations. There has been limitations because much has decontextualized this individual. We almost have been made and led to understand the individual as some kind of a standard subject, a standard modern individual. All of us have kind of tried to study an individual with the assumption that we are studying a modern individual. But as the stories from these participants will indicate, that individual, the ones they are studying, are far from that standardized modern individual. Be it in understanding those adolescents in slums, from Mastula's discussion of life in slums, you really see that how they comprehend and view themselves and their lived experience within that context, they are very much far from the kind of standard individual that has been actually projected out there. The same with what Linda has presented about, the mindsets of youths. Again, we kind of start, when we focus on mainstream conceptions of psychology, start from a template of who a youth is. And again, we get the same limitations. Now, what these contributions really bring to the discussion is a perspective that says that let's spend more time understanding deeply the context that give rise to the forms of being, the forms of self that the individuals actually take up. When we do that, we actually acknowledge that an individual is not just an interiorized brain that is working within a black box. We realize that actually context matters, history matters, politics matter, communities matter in how individual selves are shaped. So I think that is very important. We also titled this panel, giving it a broader context. We said it is within a meta-colonized context. What we mean by being in a meta-colonized context is trying to really help us understand that the history of colonialism is not very much in the past, but in the present. And it is part of the lived realities of individuals that these people studied. They are studying individuals that are living the realities of being occupied. Their being itself, their selfhood is actually occupied because of the context of colonialism. Everything you look at, it is defined in two conceptions of being. How they understand themselves as individuals versus how they understand them, how they are understood by society. And there is a distinction. How these individuals, be they individuals in the slums, be they youths, there is a way they understand themselves to have certain values, virtues, that define them as people of integrity, as people who have something to give to the world. But when they are understood from a broader societal schema, that is taken away, because the broader sociological schema already puts them in particular categories. And those categories definitely don't take into account the consciousness that is represented by their colonial context. So I think that in the interest of time, I'm being reminded that time is not on our side. I will just mention one important point that comes from all these discussions and the discussions that we had the day before or 2 days before, that when sociocultural analysis is taken seriously within conceptualizing the individual, we then are able to understand the alienation that is produced by internalized ideas and the historical internalized colonial ideas and the historical, social, and cultural systems that are responsible for what now we term as psychological brutalization. We actually say that the colonial experience was so brutal to the psyche of individuals that it has not given them space to feel free and exercise their own identity from their lived realities. I thank you very much. I don't know whether now I should be the one to conduct the open session because you mentioned that, or that is your part of the story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Julius. We are badly off in regards to time, so we only have space for 1 or 2 questions. My understanding is there's a session that's supposed to be taking place, so we'll give an opportunity. First of all, let's appreciate all the presenters and our discussant, but in respect to those who have attended this session, if you have a burning question and you'd like the discussants, the presenters to attend to it, please forward your question. Yes, please. Can someone give him a microphone, please?
Thank you very much. My name is John Kahuya. I'm a student in master's program in organizational psychology. My question goes to Mrs. Masitula Namugeni. Yeah, you were talking of the life in slums, whereby you relied on Vygotskian approach, and you talked of Damasco approach, where they said of situation, environment, situation, and context. I would like to remind about Lewin, who came up with interactive approach in behaviorism, whereby he considered that each action or each act which is posed by an individual or whoever is directed by a patterns, the situation one side, the person himself, which means cognitive or organism, and we have the response out of that. And I would like to come to Ms. Linda Nakalawa about the theory of mindset or mind control. Then I'm coming with the idea of Wilhelm Wundt, because you also mentioned in your research about Wilhelm Wundt, the German researcher, on the holistic perspective, of course, about the a part of the Gestalt theory. So in this, because you refer to social media, the group, how we perceive things, and each and every one showing his own need. Then how do we tackle that in terms of individualism internally? Because there is the self, as you said, and there is also the group. What do we do, or who we are, is also defined by a certain author, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who said that, give me a set of whoever, then I'm going to make them who I want them to be. I can make them engineers, I can make them psychologists, I can make them prostitutes, I can make them marry the woman, I can make them whoever. Now, in what you develop on mindset theory, as when you explain, how do you figure out this theory of Maurice Merleau-Ponty? Is it contradicting Maurice Merleau-Ponty, or is it complementing Maurice Merleau-Ponty in his theory? Thank you.
Before Mastura attempts to respond to that, also there's a question from one of the online attendees, and to you, Linda. First of all, they say that thanks a lot to the discussants. I would then like to know from the discussants, how best can the problematic mindset be deconstructed from its deep root in society? Monse, over to you.
Thank you so much. I would like to recognize the president of Professor Grace Mile-Chiwanja, my supervisor, and Dr. Kasuja Roscoe. And let me also take this opportunity to thank Professor Scakoma for preparing us for this presentation. I'm sorry I missed your name. What is your name again? John Kahuya, thank you so much for your good question. You talked about Cattell, and he happens to be a behavioralist, not so? And that is what I've been critiquing in my presentation, okay? He does not pay attention to sociocultural context, the situation, and the environment.
Thank you.
Have I answered your question? Thank you very much.
Linda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kahuya. I do not have the expertise to comment on mind control. That is something I personally look at askance. But what I did say in my presentation, and what I continue to say, is that within us, there are others. Within us, also others exist. And for the question of how we can deconstruct the mindset, the easiest way I can say this is that we need to help people recognize the voices that inform the different mindsets that are available for them to take on.
Thank you so much. Yes, let me go to my principal. You have a question, please go ahead.
But I shouldn't be the one refusing to follow regulations of the conference. I'm just going to be brief. Thank you very much for an interesting session. How I wish we had more time. This move around decolonizing psychology, I think, is one of the ways in which we are going to make a difference in terms of serving ourselves as Africans, because if you cannot actually build theory, you cannot create knowledge that is able to serve your purpose. This is why I would like Mastura to go beyond those Russians and to actually bring the realities to the African scholars who have actually written and done some of these propositions. We can't say that really in the last how many centuries we haven't generated theory that is able to help you understand experiences in slums. Because also you need to say exactly what is it that you're trying to say. What is your argument? I would like, for you as a PhD student, what is it that you're really trying to say? I would like to hear that briefly, but I would like really to thank you for psychology as a school generally for this decolonizing movement. It has to be a movement for sure. Otherwise, we'll keep replicating these things. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, members.
Thank you so much. Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much to the panel. My name is Matthew Elliott. I'm from the University of Leeds in UK. I'm a Wellcome Trust Fellow. I use arts-based research methodologies to look at localized conceptualizations of mental health. So I'm really interested in all the research that's been spoke about this morning. And I wonder if I could share my headache with you, because I completely believe in a localized, sociocultural, non-biomedical approach to mental health. I think the realities of this is multiple localized mental health policies, which is incredibly complex. So I just want to ask my question to the panel about how do we realize sociocultural, psychological approaches in a policy context, which would be of great benefit to the young people and the communities of which we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
If I may, how we realize sociocultural aspects in the mental health policy world. The government of Uganda and the Ministry of Health in Uganda has made efforts, valiant efforts to establish a mental health policy. And this is not something that was done through desk work. There was a lot of consultation from local practitioners. And one of the things that we are doing, something that I am doing, is to listen even when it comes to my clients. I might be looking at depression, but we are doing a lot of work in the sociocultural expressions of depression, because you might find that there are things that are considered pathological in a different context, but when you listen carefully, you realize that this person is talking about their personal experience, which might actually not be pathological. So we are doing a lot of listening. And yes, we have the tools, but we are also listening to our people in context. And we make sure that those things that we find gets to the ears of the policymakers.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I like the question, the issue of policy relating to mental health. And I think I agree with what Linda has said, but also we have a headache. You said you have a headache you want to share with us, and the headache is in the policy. We still have the same headache here as psychologists, because unlike other health professionals, who are recognized through their associations, which are already gazetted in law as professionals. Professional psychologists do not yet have that authority to regulate and to oversee the practice of psychology. So what you then have is a mental health policy that has not enjoyed, the input that would come from a well-coordinated, a well-organized professional body that is speaking with one voice. So there is something there we share. But that is not to say that on the ground, those who are working within this context are not doing their efforts. I think we have, an association of clinical psychology, an association of counseling psychology, an association of applied psychology. But now the move currently is to actually put all those disparate associations together under an umbrella that we now call the Uganda Council of Psychologists. And we are drafting a bill that will allow for all psychologies to be regulated. And then we can be able to actually have one voice in policy and other forms of negotiation. Thank you very much.
All right. A big round of applause to our discussants and to you, the audience. Thank you so much. I would like to now end this session. Enjoy the rest of the day. And let's remember that we are celebrating Mark at 100 years. To the organizers of this conference, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.